Hello everybody, thank you for joining me this evening. As you can see, I'm here in the building this time. There was technical issues going on with the laptop and technical issues going on with all the stuff. So I'm here now. I might start doing recording these here from now on. Be better than staying at home all the time. I hope everything looks okay in the picture, but we're going to pick up where we left off in Genesis, and that is in Genesis chapter 29. But before we begin, let's review a little bit. Last time we were in Genesis, we were introduced to these two brothers, Jacob and Esau. Isaac had two sons. Rebekah had two boys within her womb. They were twins, and they were struggling and fighting amongst each other inside the womb. You know, they weren't even born yet, and they're already rivals, trying to dominate each other. But when they are born, the rivalry does not stop, because Jacob lives up to his namesake, which is trickster, and he tricks Esau into selling him his birthright. And then later on in their life, he tricks Isaac, their father, into giving Jacob the blessing that Isaac was meaning for Esau, because Isaac liked Esau better, and so he was going to give him a blessing that involved him coming out dominating over his brother. If you look in chapter 27, look at the blessing that Jacob receives from Isaac. It has the matter of him being master over his brother, and Esau was left with the one that he was meaning for Jacob to have, and that was included that he would serve his brother. So the roles got reversed, and I had mentioned last time, Jacob is not necessarily a really great man. He's not a particularly good man. And we have seen thus far that he has made his way in life by tricking other people. Right from the get-go, even, the Bible is pointing out, he was hanging on to the heel of his brother when Esau was born, so that Jacob just came right out with him too. Just hanging on to the heel so that Jacob didn't have to do the work of being born. And then he extorts the birthright out of his brother. His brother is starving, he needs food. Jacob says, yeah, I'll give you the food, sell me your birthright though. And then he deceives his own father. Not just his father, but his blind father, playing a trick on a blind man. And so now his mother and his father have sent him away from their home in Hebron, and have sent him back to Haran to find a wife from among their own people. Specifically to find a wife from among Laban's family. Laban is Rebekah's brother. This is the same Laban who came out to meet Abraham's servant when Abraham's servant came to find a bride for Isaac. And on the way there, Jacob had a night vision, a dream vision, of a ladder extending up into heaven, and at the top of the ladder sat God Almighty, and up and down the ladder ascended and descended the angels to go about and do the Lord's work. And he there made a vow to God that he would serve God, and he would give God a tenth of all that he owned if God would see him safely back home. If he would see him safely back home. And of course Jacob names that place Bethel, which means the house of God. But what I failed to mention last time, and I thought about it in the meantime, is how this ties in to a theme that runs throughout the Bible, and that is the theme of exile. Exile. The theme of exile in the Bible doesn't just begin with the Jews going into exile in Babylon in, 560-something BC. It begins actually when the humans are thrown out of the garden. That garden was their home, and when they sinned and chose to rebel against God, God casts them out of the garden. He banishes them into exile. And the place where they would dwell in exile is nothing like the garden. Now Abraham has been called out of the Babylon kind of area, Mesopotamia, where everybody sort of ended up because they were exiled from the garden, and God has called a man out of that environment to be his special people, to bring him and his family back west, because remember in Genesis 3 they were banished out of the garden to the east, so he brought them back west to the Canaanite valley. And now Jacob, because of his trickery and because of his brother's anger, is being exiled again to the east, back to Haran, where Abraham was called out of. So we have this theme of exile, where even when someone is picked out of exile, eventually the person is going back into exile, and it's like this cycle. When people get up to no good, they end up going into exile. And we could talk all night about that concept, but maybe you would just want to message me privately to talk about that concept for a really long time, because I could go on for a really long time. But right now we're sticking with Genesis, so we're going to continue with the narrative here. Verse 29, Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. Once again, people are exiled, they're banished to the east. And he looked, and he saw a well in the field. And behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of the well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth, and now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and then put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. Now I want to point out something, and this is a cultural, historical context kind of thing. Not just in Israelite culture, but also in Canaanite culture, there is this idea of where a romantic encounter happens. And I don't mean romantic encounter as anything shady. I mean romantic encounter like Romeo and Juliet meeting together kind of thing. And it happens at a well. A man meets a woman at a well. It happened with, do you remember? It happened with Abraham's servant and Rebekah. He met the woman at the well, and then he brought the woman back, and Isaac loved Rebekah. Now Jacob is going to meet a woman at this well, and indeed he does meet Rachel, the daughter of Laban. So we have a man meeting a woman at the well, and that is a trend that continues through the Bible. You remember John chapter 4, Jesus, a man, meets this Samaritan woman, a woman, where? At the well. It's this weird kind of setting that just pops up. A man meets a woman and something important happens. So Jacob is here and he meets with these herdsmen, and they talk about Laban, the son of Nahor. Is he well? Yeah, he's well. Hey, look, there's his daughter coming with the flocks. And so Rachel comes with the flocks of sheep, and Jacob decides to help her because they were not able to roll the stone and water the sheep by themselves in that part of the world and in that time. Actually, still in this time, in a lot of that part of the world, water is extremely valuable, and so the owner of a plot of land owns the well. And he will very often seal it so that no one steals the water. So this well probably has like a do not remove unless you are part of Laban's family sign on it or something like that. And Jacob moves the stone, helps the herdsmen and helps Rachel and waters the flock for them. And when he meets Rachel, first off, he starts with a kiss. Not a romantic kiss, a familial kind of kiss. You remember in the ancient days, that's how family greeted one another. They gave each other a kiss. Much how we would give each other a hug or something like that. And of course, you could think Rachel is surprised by this. I've never met you, but you're acting as though we're family. And then Jacob tells her that they are family, that he is Rebekah's son, and Rebekah is the sister of Laban. So Rachel goes and runs and tells her father. So Laban hears the report, verse 13, about Jacob, his sister's son, and he runs out to meet him. And he embraced him, and he kissed him, and brought him into the house. So he told Laban all these things, all that has happened while he's there. And Laban said to him, "Surely you are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." Does that ring a bell? That's the words that Adam said when God had brought Eve to him to be his wife. This marriage thing is going on, and Laban goes ahead and quotes what Adam said on the day of his marriage. You are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. He doesn't exactly quote him, but he echoes it. And so Jacob and Laban is saying, Jacob, my boy, you are welcome here. All that I have is yours. We are going to work well together. And Laban says to Jacob, verse 15, "Because you're my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be?" Laban is established here as an honest man. And Jacob, as we already know, is the trickster, right? But Laban here is acting like the honest man. Now Laban had 2 daughters, verse 16. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. I'm getting a little flash in my mind that I've already talked about this. Maybe. But we'll go on. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. I think I said last time. I don't know what he means by her eyes were delicate. But anyway, Jacob agrees to serve for 7 years and then marry Rachel, the younger daughter. And Laban says, "Hey, sounds good. It's better than marrying her off to one of these other schmucks." So Jacob works for 7 years, and the Bible says that those 7 years felt as though they were a few days because of how much Jacob loved Rachel. Is that not just the best way that you could have put it? The most romantic thing that we've heard so far. It felt as though it were just a few days because he was working in order to marry his beloved. Fantastic. But once those 7 years are up, Laban, who has established himself as the honest man, decides to be like Jacob. Laban came up into this matter saying, you're my family member. Why would I have you serve me for nothing? Should I treat you like a slave? Tell me what you want for the work. And he said, I'm an honest guy. Now that it is the time to give his daughter in marriage to Jacob, what does Laban do? Well, they have a feast. At a feast you drink, right? You drink a lot. In fact, the word feast comes from the word to drink. Not the English word feast, but the word feast in the Bible comes from the word to drink. comes from, moving on. So they're drinking a lot. Jacob is most likely drunk, and you would need to be drunk in order for this to happen to you. Laban sends in his daughter. You know, they're married now. He sends in his daughter for the marriage night. However, it's not Rachel. It's Leah. And Jacob doesn't realize this until the morning after. Until he wakes up the morning after and sees, what? It's Leah. I guess I married Leah. Oh no. He had agreed to be married to Rachel, and yet Laban tricks him to marrying Leah. The trickster has been tricked. And from now on, we are going to see that the roles of the honest man and the trickster are going to be reversed. Jacob, so far in the story, has been the trickster, while Laban has been the honest man, or he said so. Now, Laban is going to be the trickster, and we're going to see that Jacob is going to be the honest man now. He's going to learn, and sometimes it takes getting a taste of your own medicine in order to learn how to behave uprightly. So Laban, he confronts Laban, says, "What have you done? I've married your older daughter Leah when I wanted to marry the younger." Laban says, "Oh, we must not do that kind of thing. It's against our custom. The older daughter has to be married before the younger." So Jacob says, "Okay, how about I work another 7 years and then I marry Rachel?" Laban says, "Great, let's do that." And of course, he does so, and doesn't seem to be a long time at all, and he marries Rachel. He works another 7 years after that with Laban, and that is when chapter 30 takes place. Chapter 29, verse 31 through verse 30 takes place. Now here's where it gets comical. Jacob, him getting tricked, that's funny, that's ironic. But here's where it gets crazy, okay? His family dynamic. You think of the most dysfunctional family that you can think of. Doesn't even come close to Jacob and his family, which is another reason why this is definitely not fake, because you never want to talk about the progenitor of your national identity like this, okay? The Lord saw that Leah was unloved. Right off the bat, Jacob, come on, you're not loving your wife. He saw that Leah was unloved. He opened her womb, but Rachel was left barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben. She also conceived 2 other sons, named them Simeon and Levi, 3 other sons. The 4th one is named Judah. If these all ring a bell, you'll notice they are the tribes of Israel, right? His sons become the tribes of Israel. Most of them do. So we got Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Reuben's name means, what did it mean? Reuben's name means see a son. It's a little weird. Ben is son. Ru means see, behold. So behold, God has given me a son. Then Simeon means heard, hearing. Simon, Simeon. I think it's actually pronounced Shimon. But it means to hear, because she says, the Lord has heard the Lord has heard that I was unloved. Then she names the 3rd one Levi, because Levi means attached, and she says, I have borne my husband 3 sons. Surely now he will be attached to me. Leah places her worth as a wife and as a person on her ability to have children. And so she is thinking, now that I have these children, surely now my husband is attached to me. And then she bears the fourth son, Judah. She names him Judah because Judah means praise. And she says, praise the Lord. I will praise the Lord, Judah. Now after this is where verse 30 picks up, or chapter 30 picks up. Leah sees that she has no children, and she was jealous of her sister. So she says to Jacob something very similar to what Sarah said to Abraham. Here is my maidservant, go into her so that we can have children through her. Now her name was Bilhah. That was the maidservant that Laban gave to Rachel. So Jacob and Bilhah have some children, and let's see, where is it? The fifth son of Jacob is named, where'd it go? Dan. Dan means to judge, or it means judge. So she is saying, God has judged my case, and he has heard my voice and given me a son, so she named him Dan. Then there is another son from Bilhah, and that son is named Naphtali, because Naphtali means my wrestling or my struggle. So she's saying, with great struggle, with great wrestling, I have struggled or I've wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. Rachel and Leah are using their ability to have children as a means of picking at each other. What kind of family dysfunction is this? So Leah sees, verse 9, that she has stopped bearing sons, and so she takes her maidservant and has Jacob have children with her maidservant Zilpah, and Zilpah bears a son, Gad, which means like a troop, like a great host of people. So she's saying, oh, so many children, it's like a troop, Gad. And then she bears a second son, Zilpah does, and Leah says, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she calls his name Asher, which means happy. That's a lovely name. In case anyone you know has to be naming some children soon, Asher, fantastic name. Now, Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest and found some mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother, Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, this is where it steps up a level in comedy, okay? Please give me some of your son's mandrakes. And verse 15, but she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you also take away my son's mandrakes? You know, is it a small matter that you've stolen my man? Would you also take away these nice plants that my son has found? So Rachel said, Rachel said, therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. Goodness. Now they're not even just messing around. They are hiring out their husband for plants, for these roots, these mandrakes. They're making deals with each other using Jacob as collateral. I mean, you can't make up this stuff. So that results in another son, and his name is Issachar, which means wages, because that's kind of the circumstances of his birth. And then also another son, and his name is Zebulun, which means dwelling, because God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me, thinking that she has finally won the struggle, you know. I don't know how many years this must have taken, but these two sisters are just going at each other in this struggle for their husband's heart, using children, using their role as wives, and they are just picking at each other. So, verse 22, and this is close to where it ends, God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph, and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. Joseph is Rachel's first biological child. This is why, later we find that Joseph is Jacob's favorite son. Because at the point where Joseph's story kind of takes off, he is the only son that Rachel bore to him. He is this precious thing. That's why he was the favorite son. That's why he's the one who got the coat of many colors. That's why he's the one that all of his brothers were jealous of. Joseph is Rachel's first son. However, what's weird and funny, Joseph's name means he will add. Because she said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So Rachel is looking forward so much to having this next son that she names Joseph after the idea of having another son. I like all of these other names. I like the name Joseph, don't get me wrong. But I like the meaning of all of these other names. It's, this is the circumstances surrounding his birth. This is what I was feeling when he was born. I was happy. I felt that God was with me. He was hearing me. He was justifying me. Joseph. At this point, Rachel is so caught up in the competition that she gives him the name Joseph. I just thought of this, so I'm going to go off on it. She gives him the name Joseph. Just the name that means, hey, I'm anticipating that God is going to give me another son, so I am even with my sister, so I will finally win. Wow. Talk about a dysfunctional family. I don't know how much time I have left. There's a clock over there, but there's something in the way of it right now, so I have no idea how much time I have left. But I think that's where I'm going to end it now. The beginnings of the nation of Israel are complicated and they're crazy. It's like a soap opera mixed with a comedy, all thrown into an ancient world setting. But you can't make this stuff up. This is like too crazy to be made up. Because if Genesis was the Jewish attempt at just making themselves look good, which every culture's origin story is an attempt to make themselves look good. It's something that they want to be proud of. We talk about the Revolutionary War. We talk always about how we fought off the British. We did it for freedom and for liberty. And we don't mention when we made a lot of slaves fight the war too, and when we afterwards did not release those slaves who valiantly fought for the freedom of the land that we live in. But hey, it's our nation's history, and so we tell the parts that we're proud of. That concept kind of tells me that this origin story of Israel is not made up, because it has so much that they have no reason to be proud of. It has so much that they should not be proud of in this story. Abraham was not the paragon of faith that everybody seems to make him out to be. He had a moment where his faith was put to the test and he believed God and he counted him as righteous, but there were also all these other moments in his life where he just failed. Then there was Isaac, and he had tests of his faith, and sometimes he passed those tests, but a lot of other times he failed. And then we have Jacob, who is a trickster, and he gets tricked. And even when he makes out with something because of trickery, he receives the consequences of that. He doesn't get away with it. So, and they're not great people. But they are still the ones that God uses. They're not particularly good men, but they are still the ones that God uses. And Leah and Rachel are not particularly good women either, because they are at each other's throats here, and they're using their maidservants. They're using other people to get at each other's throats as well. They're not very good people either. And yet, this is still where the nation of Israel, God's special people in the Old Testament times, comes from. This is their origin. And it's real. And I think that's why it is so crazy and this family is so dysfunctional, because it's a real family. Okay? And it began under these real circumstances. And that is something interesting to keep in mind. When we read the Bible, a lot of times, mostly because a lot of us have been hearing these stories since we were children, we don't think about them as if they were real. They are very real. Because when we tell our children stories that are in the Bible, we give them kind of the whitewashed, watered down version. You know, we talk about Noah and the ark. The Lord said to Noah, you got to build an ark and take all the animals in it. They go in 2 by 2, all of that. And we don't talk about everybody in the world other than Noah's family dying in a massive, devastating global flood that was brought upon because of people's sin. And when we talk about the story of Jacob and Rachel meeting at the well, and they fall in love, and Jacob loves her so much that working for 7 and then 14 years is no big deal, we then fail to mention the part where their family is so dysfunctional that Leah and Rachel are using their ability to produce children as weapons against each other in the relationship dynamic. And they even use their servants who are at their whim. They use them to get at each other still. And that's a part that we don't mention. You know, a lot of the stories in the Bible, and ironically enough, a lot of the stories in the Bible that we tell to children just all the time. I'm not saying you shouldn't tell your children things that are from the Bible. But a lot of the stories we tell our children are not actually kid-friendly stories. You know, they're not fun things. They're not. Anyway, that is something to think about. The real stories have all of these details, and they have all of these real people who have real problems and who are going through real emotions and real struggles, and they do some real messed up things, and yet they are part of God's plan. And I think that bodes well for us as human beings, flawed as we are. We can still be a part of God's plan. I have probably run on way too long, so I'm going to close it out right here. Thank you for joining me this evening. Let me know if you prefer me recording here, because if you don't, I can still figure out some other way of recording. Thank you again, and I hope that everybody stays healthy, stays safe, and I hope to see you again soon.